The alarm started at exactly 0347 Galactic Standard Time, not the sharp, urgent alarms of attack or emergency, but the slow, confused beeping that meant something was wrong, but nobody knew what. Admiral Bong Su rolled out of his sleeping pod on the Altarian command ship and stumbled to the bridge. His second officer, Captain Do Yoon, was already there, staring at screens full of yellow warning lights. "What is it?" Bong Su asked. "We lost contact with the human station at Kepler 442, Do Yoon said. "All communication just stopped. No distress signal, no emergency beacon, just silence." Bong Su frowned. The humans at Kepler 442 were always talking. They ran a major trade hub there, constantly sending messages about shipping schedules and cargo manifests. For them to go quiet was like a star suddenly stopping its light. "Send a patrol ship," Bong Su ordered. But before Do Yoon could respond, more yellow lights appeared on the screens. Then more. Communication links with human settlements across 3 sectors were going dark one after another. "Sir," Do Yoon's voice was tight with worry. "It's not just Kepler. We're losing contact with human colonies all across the Rim territories." On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Nari was having the same problem. She sat in her laboratory on the Science Directorate station, watching her communication board light up with failed connection attempts. Every human research facility she worked with had gone silent in the past hour. Nari had been working with humans for 15 years. They were strange creatures, always worried about things that seemed unimportant. They talked constantly about being prepared and watching for signs. Other species found them annoying, but Nari had grown to like their careful ways. She tried, calling her human colleague, Dr. Smith, at the research station on Proxima Centauri. The connection went through, but nobody answered. The automated system said all personnel were temporarily unavailable. This was wrong. Dr. Smith never left his post. He had been studying quantum reactions for 20 years and rarely even slept. Nari grabbed her emergency communicator and called her supervisor. "Something has happened to the humans," she said. "All of them." Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. Trade captains found human ports empty but still powered. Military officers discovered human defense stations abandoned but fully functional. Scientists lost contact with human research teams mid-experiment. Council Chairman Guan received the first official report 6 hours after the silence began. He sat in his office on the Central Council station, reading reports from 17 different sectors. Every single human settlement, ship, and outpost had gone dark within a 2-hour window. "How many humans are we talking about?" Guan asked. His aide, a young officer named Wan. "Approximately 47 billion across all colonies and ships," Wan replied. "Plus another 12 billion on Earth and the core human worlds." "And they're all gone?" "Not gone, sir. Just not responding. The facilities are still active, power is still on, but there are no humans anywhere." Guan leaned back in his chair. Humans had been part of the Galactic Council for 200 years. They were not the strongest species, or the smartest, or the most advanced. But they were reliable. They did their jobs, paid their taxes, and rarely caused trouble. Well, that was not entirely true. Lately, humans had been causing a different kind of trouble. They had been asking strange questions in council meetings, questions about ancient protocols and deep space monitoring. They had been requesting permission to build installations in empty space, far from any trade routes or planets. When other council members asked why, humans always gave the same answer. "We need to be prepared." Prepared for what? They never said clearly. They talked about old threats and things that sleep in dark spaces, Other species thought humans were becoming paranoid. 3 months ago, human representatives had made a formal presentation to the Council. They showed star charts of regions where space seemed somehow wrong. They presented data about gravitational anomalies and quantum disturbances that made no sense to anyone else. The human ambassador, a serious woman named Kim, had stood before the full council and said, "Something is coming. We have seen the signs before. We need to work together to prepare defenses." The council had voted down every human proposal. The Zelkarian delegate had called their concerns primitive superstition. The Morphean representative had laughed at their ancient fears. Guan remembered Kim's final words to the council. "If you will not help us prepare, we will prepare alone. But remember that we tried to warn you." Now the humans were gone. Admiral Bongsu's patrol ship reached Kepler 442, 18 hours after communications went dark. What they found made no sense. The space station was perfectly normal. All lights were on. Ships moved along automated flight paths. Cargo loaders worked steadily, moving containers from ship to ship. Everything worked exactly as it should, except there were no humans anywhere. Captain Do Yoon led the boarding party. They found the station commander's office with coffee still warm on the desk. The duty schedules were posted for the next month. Personal items sat in quarters as if their owners had just stepped out for a moment. But every human was gone. "Check the logs," Do Yoon ordered. The last entry was time-stamped 0341 Galactic Standard Time. It was written by Station Commander Park and said only, "Protocol Omega is now active. We tried to warn them. May whoever finds this understand what." We could not make them see. In the main control room, they found something even stranger. Every screen showed the same message, written in the common galactic language. "Emergency evacuation complete. Facilities left operational for temporary use by surviving species. Do not touch the lock systems. We will monitor from a distance." Dr. Nari's investigation team found similar messages at every human facility they checked. The humans had not been attacked or kidnapped. They had left voluntarily, and they had left everything behind in perfect working order. At the Proxima Centauri research station, Nari found Dr. Smith's laboratory exactly as he had left it. His experiments were paused but not shut down. His computer was logged in with a note on the screen. "Dr. Nari, please continue the quantum resonance study. The data may be important soon. We have gone to implement the protocols we told you about. Watch the edge of mapped space." The edge of mapped space. Humans had always been interested in the boundaries of known territory. They built observation posts in systems where no one else wanted to go. They studied areas of space that seemed empty and uninteresting to other species. Council Chairman Guan called an emergency session. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the Great Council chamber. The mood was confused and worried. "The humans have abandoned all their territory," Guan announced. "They left behind functioning facilities and ships worth trillions of credits. They took only their people and some personal items." Counselor Ray, from the Altarian delegation, stood up. "Did they say why?" "Only that they tried to warn us about something," Guan replied. "The same warnings we voted down 3 months ago." The Zelkarian delegate made a dismissive sound. "Humans always saw threats where none existed. Perhaps they finally decided to chase their imaginary enemies somewhere else." But not everyone agreed. Counselor Yuna from the Trade Federation looked worried. "Humans were not cowards," she said. "If they left everything behind, they had a good reason? What reason could be good enough to abandon 47 billion people's worth of homes and businesses? Asked Taeho from the military sector. Nobody had an answer. The meeting ended with a decision to send investigation teams to major human facilities. They would try to understand what had happened and what the humans had been so afraid of. As the IDA representatives filed out of the chamber, Wan approached Chairman Guan with a new report. "Sir," Wan said quietly, "our deep space monitors are detecting unusual activity at the edge of mapped space, in the regions the humans always wanted to watch." Guan looked at the data. Energy readings that made no sense. Gravitational disturbances that should not exist. For the first time, Guan wondered if the humans had been right to be afraid. 3 weeks had passed since the humans disappeared. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by something else. Opportunity. Counselor Ray sat in her office, looking at maps of former human territory. Hundreds of star systems, thousands of stations, entire trade networks sitting empty and unclaimed. The economic value was enormous. Her assistant, Jun, knocked on the door. "The Territorial Committee is ready for your proposal," he said. Ray nodded. Today the council would decide what to do with all the things humans had left behind. Several species had already made claims. The Zelkarians wanted the mining stations. The Morphians were interested in the research facilities. Everyone wanted something. But Ray had been reading the reports from investigation teams. What they found in human space was troubling. In the council chamber, Chairman Guan called the session to order. "We are here to discuss the redistribution of abandoned human assets," he announced. "Counselor Taeho will present the first proposal." Taeho stood up with a confident smile. He represented the Corvan Empire, one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. "The solution is simple," he said. "We divide human territory based on contribution to galactic defense. My empire will take responsibility for the Outer Rim installations." "Your empire will take the valuable mining rights, you mean," said Counselor Yuna from across the room. She represented the Traders' Alliance and was not impressed by Taeho's military posturing. "I propose we distribute assets based on economic need and trade relationships." The argument that followed was loud and long. Every species wanted the best pieces of human territory. The humans had been good at picking valuable locations. Counselor Ray waited for the shouting to die down before she spoke. "Has anyone actually studied what the humans left behind?" she asked. The room fell quiet. Guan looked at her with interest. "Explain." "I have read every investigation report," Ray said. "The humans did not just abandon their territory. They prepared it for us. Every facility has been optimized for use by other species. Food systems adjusted for different diets. Atmospheric controls set for various breathing requirements. They spent months getting ready to leave." Jun stepped forward with a data pad. "We also found something else. The humans left instruction manuals, detailed guides for operating their equipment, written in simple galactic common language. This got everyone's attention. Human technology was often more advanced than what other species used. Having access to their manufacturing systems and research equipment could be very valuable." "Where are these manuals?" asked the Zelkarian delegate. "That's the problem," Ray continued. "Everything has security locks. Simple locks, but locks nonetheless. Each facility has an access panel that requires a specific code." Dr. Nari, who had been invited as a technical advisor, stood up. "I've been working on those locks," she said. The humans used a basic encryption system, not very sophisticated. I think they wanted us to be able to break it eventually. Eventually? Guan asked. It takes time, but it's possible. I've already opened several research facilities. What I found inside is impressive. Nari activated a holographic display showing technical diagrams that made most of the council members' eyes hurt just looking at them. Human research was decades ahead of ours in several fields, she explained. Quantum manipulation, gravitational, engineering, something they called dimensional topology. Their notes mention technologies we don't even have names for. Excited murmurs filled the chamber. Advanced technology meant power, wealth, and military advantage. But Nari held up her hand. There's something else. Every facility has the same warning message. It says, Emergency Protocol Omega, do not activate unless absolute necessity. What does that mean? Asked Taeho. I don't know. The humans were very careful about labeling. Everything else clearly. But when it comes to Protocol Omega, they only left warnings. Bo Ram, a young engineer from the Altarian Technical Corps, had been studying the Outer Rim installations. She stood up nervously. I may have some information about that, she said. All eyes turned to her. Bo Ram had spent 2 weeks examining the massive structures humans had been building at the edge of mapped space. The installations are still active, she reported. Automated construction continues. The structures are enormous, some larger than our biggest space stations. They seem to be connected in a network spanning thousands of light years. Connected how? Guan asked. Quantum entanglement communicators, gravitational field generators, and something else. Devices that seem to affect space itself. The readings don't match anything in our physics textbooks. This was exciting news. If humans had been building a galaxy-spanning network of advanced installations, controlling it could give the Council unprecedented power. Can we access these installations? Taeho asked. His military mind was already thinking about the strategic advantages. That's where it gets interesting, Bo Ram said. Each installation has the same basic structure. Living quarters, power, systems, manufacturing facilities. But at the center of each one is a sealed chamber. No windows, no obvious way in. And all of them are connected to a central control system. Where is this central control? Yuna wanted to know. Bo Ram consulted. Her datapad. Coordinates indicate a location at the extreme edge of the galaxy, beyond our normal patrol routes. We found references to it in human files. They called it Command Zero. The possibilities were making everyone excited. A central control system for galaxy-spanning installations built with technology decades ahead of anyone else's. It could be the greatest prize in galactic history. I propose we send an expedition to this Command Zero, Taeho declared. Secure the control systems before someone else does. Who else would try? Asked the Zelkarian delegate. The humans are gone. Other species might be investigating human territories, too, Taeho replied. We need to act fast. Chairman Guan looked around the room. He could see the greed in everyone's eyes. The humans had left behind something valuable, and every species wanted their share. But Counselor Ray was still troubled. Don't we want to know why they left first? She asked. The humans spent 200 years building all this. Why would they just abandon it? Because they were afraid of shadows, the Zelkarian delegate scoffed. They always talked about imaginary threats. Maybe they finally scared themselves into running away. Or maybe, said Dr. Nari quietly, they knew something we don't. Minho, The head of the engineering guild had been silent during most of the debate. Now he spoke up. I've been analyzing human technical specifications. Their installations aren't just advanced. They're designed for a specific purpose. Everything points toward defense. Defense against what? Guan asked. I don't know, but look at the pattern. Minho activated his own display, showing a map of human installations. They built observation posts at the edge of mapped space. They created a network of powerful facilities in a defensive ring around inhabited systems, and they stockpiled resources for extended operations. That sounds like preparation for war, Taeho observed. But war against whom? Yuna asked. There are no hostile species beyond the edge of mapped space. We've surveyed those areas. They're empty. Dr. Yoon, a specialist in theoretical physics, had been studying human research notes. She stood up slowly. Maybe that's the problem, she said. The areas aren't supposed to be empty. What do you mean? Guan asked. Human research files mention something called deep space topology. They were studying regions where space itself behaves strangely. Areas where their instruments detected gravitational anomalies, quantum disturbances, and what they called intrusion signatures. Intrusion from where? They had theories about spaces between dimensions, places where physics works differently. According to their notes, these spaces sometimes leak into ours. The chamber fell silent. The idea of other dimensions was science fiction to most species, but humans had apparently taken it seriously enough to build galaxy-wide defenses. This is speculation, Taeho said finally. We're talking about concrete assets with real value. Whatever the humans were afraid of, it hasn't happened. We have an opportunity to claim advanced technology and strategic positions. The vote was closer than Guan expected, but the result was clear. The Council would divide human territory among member species based on military contribution and economic need. Investigation teams would continue studying human technology, and a joint expedition would be sent to Command Zero to secure the central control systems. As the session ended, Counselor Ray approached Dr. Nari. Do you really think we should be doing this? She asked. Nari looked at the datapad in her hands, full of human research that she barely understood. The humans left us everything, she said. They could have destroyed it all before they left. Instead, they made it easy for us to find and use. That's what worries me, Ray replied. Why would they give us access to weapons powerful enough to threaten the entire galaxy? Maybe, Nari said quietly. They're not weapons at all. Maybe they're the only things standing between us and something much worse. But the Council had made its decision. Ships were already being prepared for the journey to Command Zero. Soon they would have control of whatever the humans had built. What they would do with that control remained to be seen. 6 months had passed since the humans disappeared. The galaxy was settling into its new normal. Minho stood in what used to be the human research facility on Kepler 442. Now it belonged to the Engineering Guild. His team had spent weeks learning to operate human equipment, and the results were remarkable. Show me the latest breakthrough, Minho said to his lead engineer, Ki Young. Ki Young activated a holographic display that made the air shimmer with complex mathematical equations. We cracked the quantum resonance systems, he said proudly. The humans were using technology we thought was impossible. The display showed a device that could manipulate matter at the atomic level. With this technology, they could build materials stronger than anything previously known. They could create energy sources that would last for thousands of years. How far ahead were they? Minho asked. Conservative estimate? 50 years ahead of our best research, maybe more. Ki Young pulled up another display. But that's not the strangest part. Look at this. The new display showed research notes written in human script, now translated by their computers. The notes talked about deep space topology and dimensional barrier maintenance. They were studying the structure of space itself, Ki Young explained. According to these notes, they believed that reality has layers, different dimensions, existing in the same place but separated by what they called quantum barriers. Minho frowned. That sounds like theoretical physics, not engineering. That's what I thought. But look at this. Ki Young showed him technical diagrams for devices that seemed designed to detect and strengthen these quantum barriers. They were building machines to monitor dimensional stability. Why would they need to do that? Ki Young hesitated. According to their research, sometimes the barriers break down. When that happens, things from other dimensions can cross into ours. Minho stared at the diagrams. Human technology was impressive, but this sounded more like science fiction than science. Still, the equipment worked exactly as the plans described. Across the galaxy, Dr. Yoon was making similar discoveries. She had taken over the human research station at Proxima Centauri, and what she found there was keeping her awake at night. Her assistant, Wu Jin, brought her another cup of coffee. It was her 6th cup today, but she couldn't stop reading human research files. "Doctor, you need to rest," Wu Jin said gently. "I can't stop now," Yoon replied, not looking up from her screen. "Look at this data." The screen showed gravitational measurements from the edge of mapped space. Human instruments had detected patterns that made no sense according to conventional physics. "They were tracking something," Yoon said. "Something moving in empty space, something that shouldn't exist." "What kind of something?" "I don't know. The readings show gravitational disturbances without any visible mass, energy signatures that don't match any known phenomenon, and quantum fluctuations that suggest intrusions." "Intrusions from where?" Eun pulled up another file. This one was marked with the highest security classification humans used. It contained observations spanning 200 years, all tracking the same inexplicable phenomena. "The humans called them deep ones," she said. "Entities that exist in spaces between dimensions. According to this research, they've been trying to break through into our reality for centuries." Wu Jin looked skeptical. "That sounds impossible." "So did quantum manipulation, until we saw human machines doing it." Yoon highlighted sections of the research. The humans weren't just studying these entities. They were fighting them. The evidence was all there in the files. Records of battles fought in empty space against enemies that existed only partially in normal reality. Weapons designed to affect beings made of living void. Defensive installations built to strengthen the barriers between dimensions. "If this is true," Wu Jin said slowly, "then the humans weren't paranoid. They were protecting us." Meanwhile, the expedition to Command Zero was making progress. Captain Do Yoon led a fleet of 12 ships toward the coordinates Bo-Ram had discovered. The journey took them beyond the normal patrol routes, into regions of space that few species had ever explored. "Captain," his navigation officer So Jin called out, "we're approaching the coordinates." Do Yoon looked at the main screen. At first, he saw nothing but empty space and distant stars. Then his instruments began detecting something enormous. "Magnify." "Sector 7, he ordered. The screen zoomed in to reveal a structure that defied belief. It was massive beyond anything Du-Yun had ever seen, larger than entire space stations, built in a complex geometric pattern that hurt to look at directly. "Sir," Sojin said in an amazed voice, "it's 12 kilometers across, and it's not alone." She was right. As their instruments swept the area, they detected dozens of similar structures, all connected by streams of energy that created a vast network in empty space. "Take us closer to the central structure," Do-Yoon ordered. As they approached, they could see that the human installations were still active. Lights moved along the surfaces in complex patterns. Energy flowed between different sections. Automated. Systems continued their work, maintaining and improving the structures, but there were no humans anywhere. "Captain," his communications officer Dal called out, "I'm detecting a signal from the central facility. It's an automated message. Put it on speakers." A calm human voice filled the bridge. "Welcome to Command Zero. Automated systems are maintaining full operational status. Access is granted to authorized Galactic Council representatives. Please proceed to Docking Bay 7 for facility orientation." Du-Yoon felt a chill. The message had been recorded months ago, but it addressed them as if the humans had known they would come. The docking bay was enormous, designed to accommodate ships much larger than anything the Council currently operated. As they landed, automated, systems began preparing the facility for their arrival. "Captain," Dal said nervously, "the facility is adjusting its atmosphere and gravity for our species. How does it know what we need?" "The humans were thorough," Do-Yoon replied, but he was wondering the same thing. They entered Command Zero through an airlock that led to a vast central chamber. The walls were covered with displays showing star maps, energy readings, and data streams from thousands of installations across the galaxy. At the center of the chamber stood a single control console. It was elegant in its simplicity, just a few displays and one large switch under a transparent protective dome. Above the switch, words were written in every major galactic language. "Emergency Protocol Omega. Activate only in case of absolute necessity." "What do you think it does?" asked Young, Do-Yoon's chief engineer. "I don't know, but the humans clearly thought it was important." Do-Yoon examined the console carefully. "Look at this." Next to the main switch was a smaller display, with a message that read, "If you are reading this, we have failed to convince you of the danger. The Council was warned. The choice is now yours." The message was signed by Admiral Kim, the human representative who had made the final presentation to the Council 6 months ago. "They knew we would end up here," Dal observed. "More than that," Do-Yoon said grimly. "They planned for it." Over the following days, Do-Yoon's team explored Command Zero thoroughly. What they found was both impressive and disturbing. The facility was designed to coordinate a galaxy-wide defensive network. Every human installation was connected to this central command post. From here, someone could monitor the entire galaxy and control defensive systems spanning thousands of light years. But defensive against what? The answer came from files hidden deep in the facility's computer systems. Heye, the team's data specialist, found records that the humans had tried to keep secret. "Captain," she called urgently, "you need to see this." The files contained video recordings from human observation posts at the edge of mapped space. The recordings showed nothing. Empty space, distant stars, the normal view from the edge of the galaxy. But when enhanced by human sensor technology, something else became visible. Shapes moving in the darkness between stars, entities that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. Things that should not exist. "What are they?" Do-Yoon asked. According to human classifications, they're called deep ones, Hai replied. Entities from dimensions that exist parallel to ours. They've been trying to break through into our reality for thousands of years. And the humans were stopping them? More than that. The humans were fighting a war we didn't even know existed. The recording showed battles that defied understanding. Human ships engaging enemies that appeared and disappeared without warning. Weapons that fired energy beams into empty space, somehow affecting things that weren't entirely there. Why didn't they tell us? Asked Young. Hay pulled up records of council meetings. They tried. Every presentation the humans made to the council was about this threat. Every request for resources, every proposal for defensive installations, every warning about ancient dangers. It was all about the deep ones, and we ignored them. Worse. We voted down their proposals and called them paranoid. Do-yoon stared at the main control switch. Now he understood what it was for. Protocol Omega wasn't a weapon. It was an emergency beacon. A call for help when the situation became desperate. But help from whom? The humans were gone. Captain, Dal said quietly, our deep space sensors are detecting anomalies at the edge of the galaxy. The same signatures, the emergency council session was called for Aero 800 Galactic Standard Time. Representatives from every major species gathered in the Great Chamber, their faces showing confusion and growing fear. Chairman Guan stood at the central podium holding a datapad containing Captain Do-yoon's report from Command Zero, the report that changed everything. Fellow council members, Guan began, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to say. We have received disturbing information from our expedition to the human control facility. Murmurs filled the chamber. For weeks, everyone had been expecting good news about human technology and the valuable installations they could claim. Captain Do-yoon, please present your findings, Guan said. Do-yoon stood up, still wearing his deep space uniform. He had traveled straight from Command Zero to deliver this report in person. The urgency in his eyes was clear to everyone present. Honorable Council members, Do-yoon began, we have discovered the true purpose of human installations. They were not weapons or tools of expansion. They were defensive systems protecting the galaxy from threats we never knew existed. He activated a holographic display showing the vast network of human installations spanning the galaxy's edge. The humans were monitoring entities they called deep ones, beings from parallel dimensions who have been attempting to break into our reality for thousands of years. The Zelkarian delegate made a dismissive sound. More human superstition. Next, you'll tell us they found ghosts in space. Do-yoon's expression didn't change. I have video evidence. The hologram shifted to show enhanced recordings from human observation posts. At first, the images looked like normal empty space. Then the computer processing revealed shapes moving in the darkness, things that seemed to exist only partially. In normal reality, the chamber fell silent. These entities exist in spaces between dimensions, Do-yoon continued. According to human research, they consume not just matter and energy, but the very fabric of reality itself. Where they pass, space becomes unstable. Stars go out. Planets cease to exist. Counselor Ray leaned forward. If this is true, why didn't the humans tell us directly? They tried. Do-yoon displayed records of human presentations to the Council over the past 50 years. Every warning about ancient threats, every request for defensive installations, every proposal for monitoring systems, it was all about this threat. We thought they were being paranoid, admitted Counselor Yuna. The humans understood our skepticism, Do-Yoon said. That's why they prepared for this scenario. Command Zero contains a complete record of their research, their defensive strategies, and their final option. He displayed an image of the central control switch under its protective dome. Protocol Omega, an emergency beacon that will call the humans back if the situation becomes desperate. Counselor Taeho stood up abruptly. Call them back from where? We don't know where they went. The records suggest they withdrew to staging areas outside our galaxy, places where they could prepare for a final defensive action. Dr. Yoon, who had been invited as a technical advisor, stood up. Captain Do-Yoon's findings match what I've discovered in human research files. The humans weren't expanding into the galaxy. They were conducting a fighting retreat. A retreat from what? Asked the Morphean representative. From the galactic core, Yoon replied. According to their historical records, humanity originally came from systems near the galaxy's center. They were driven out by the same entities that are now approaching our region of space. The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't been newcomers to galactic civilization. They had been refugees running from an ancient enemy. Earth wasn't their homeworld, Yoon continued. It was their fallback position after losing their original territories. They've been fighting this war for millennia. Chairman Guan felt the weight of terrible understanding settling over him. How long do we have? Do-Yoon consulted his datapad. Our sensors detect gravitational anomalies approaching the outer rim. If the patterns match human projections, the first incursions will begin in 4 to 6 months. Incursions of what exactly? Taeho demanded. Reality tears, Do-Yoon replied. Places where space itself breaks down and allows the deep ones to enter our dimension. Once they establish a foothold, they can open larger tears and bring more of their kind through. The chamber erupted in frightened conversations. Representatives demanded more information, better explanations, some kind of reassurance that this was all a mistake. But Counselor Wan had been studying the human data files. He stood up, and the chamber gradually fell quiet. I've been analyzing human defensive strategies, Wan said. They weren't just monitoring the edge of space. They were conducting active operations, missions to strengthen dimensional barriers and prevent incursions. What kind of missions? Guan asked. The files are encrypted, but I can see references to deep strike operations and barrier reinforcement protocols. The humans were sending ships into the spaces between dimensions to fight these entities directly. The idea was terrifying. Human crews venturing into alien realities to battle enemies that existed outside normal physics. That explains why human ships were so heavily armed, observed Taeho. We thought they were aggressive. Actually, they were carrying weapons designed for impossible battles. Dr. Hay from the Military Sciences Division had been quietly studying the human command protocols. Now she spoke up. There's something else. The humans divided their defense strategy into several phases. Phase 1 was monitoring and early warning. Phase 2 was barrier reinforcement. Phase 3 was active interdiction, fighting the entities in deep space before they could establish footholds. What's Phase 4? Guan asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know. Total war, Hai replied grimly. If the first 3 phases fail, Phase 4 calls for the complete militarization of galactic civilization and the sacrifice of entire star systems to contain the threat. The chamber fell into horrified silence. The humans prepared us for that, Hay continued. Every installation they built can be converted to military use. Every piece of technology they left behind has potential weapons applications. They turned the galaxy into a fortress and then handed us the keys. So Jin, who had been examining economic data, raised her hand. But we're not ready for this kind of war. Our species aren't militarized like humans were. We don't have the ships, the weapons, or the training. That's why Protocol Omega exists, Do-Yoon said. The humans knew we couldn't fight this war alone. If we activate the beacon, they'll return to help us. But at what cost? Asked Ray. The humans withdrew for a reason. Maybe they decided this war couldn't be won. Or maybe, suggested Juan, they decided it was a war they shouldn't have to fight alone. The debate that followed was unlike anything in Council history. Species that had competed for resources and territory now faced the possibility that none of it would matter if reality itself was under attack. The Zelkarian delegate remained skeptical. This is all based on human claims. How do we know any of it is true? Dr. Yoon activated her own display, showing current sensor data from the galaxy's edge. Because it's happening now. Our instruments are detecting the same anomalies the humans warned us about. Space itself is becoming unstable in 12 different sectors. Gravity wells are forming where no mass exists, added Dr. Nari. Quantum. Fields are fluctuating in patterns that violate basic physics. Whatever the humans were afraid of, it's getting closer. Guan looked around the chamber at the faces of his fellow council members. Fear, confusion, and growing understanding showed in their expressions. We have a choice to make, he said. We can try to handle this threat ourselves, using human technology and defensive installations. Or we can activate Protocol Omega and call for help from the only species that has experience fighting this enemy. What if the humans don't come? Asked Yuna. Then we face the consequences of our arrogance alone, Ray replied. Tejo stood up, his military background showing in his straight posture. I've seen the human weapons specifications. I've studied their defensive strategies. If we're going to fight this war, we need them. But activating that switch means admitting we were wrong, the Zelkarian delegate pointed out. It means acknowledging that humans were trying to protect us, while we called them paranoid and aggressive. Pride is a luxury we can't afford, one said quietly. Not when reality itself is at stake. The vote was scheduled for the next day, giving representatives time to consult with their home governments. But everyone knew what the choice really was. As the session ended, Guan remained in the chamber, staring at the holographic display showing human installations across the galaxy. All of it prepared for a war they hadn't understood. All of it left behind by a species that had tried to warn them. Tomorrow they would decide whether to swallow their pride and ask for help, or face the dark alone. Guan wondered if the humans would answer their call. More importantly, he wondered if it would be too late by the time they did. The vote was unanimous. Chairman Guan stood in the council chamber, looking at the final tally displayed on the great screen. 47 species, 47 votes in favor of activating Protocol Omega. Even the Zelkarian delegate had changed. His vote after reviewing the latest sensor data from the galaxy's edge. The Council has decided, Guan announced. We will activate the human emergency beacon and request their assistance in dealing with the approaching threat. 3 hours later, a specially equipped transport ship carried the Council's chosen representative toward Command Zero. Ki Young sat in the passenger compartment, reviewing the activation procedures one final time. He had volunteered for this duty, despite knowing that activating an unknown alien system carried significant risks. But someone had to do it, and Kai Young was one of the few engineers who fully understood human technology. "Approaching Command Zero," the pilot announced. "Docking in 10 minutes." Kai Young looked out the viewport at the massive human installation. It seemed different somehow, more active than when Captain Do-Yoon's team had first discovered it. Lights pulsed along its surface in complex patterns, and energy readings were higher than before. "The facility is responding to our approach," the pilot observed. "It's like it knows why we're here." Inside Command Zero, Ki Young made his way to the central control chamber. The switch waited under its protective dome, exactly as Do-Yoon had described. But now additional displays were active, showing real-time data from across the galaxy. Ki Young could see the sensor readings that had convinced the Council to act. Gravitational anomalies were spreading like an infection across the outer rim. 12 sectors now showed signs of spatial distortion. In 3 of those sectors, stars had begun to flicker and dim. A soft chime drew his attention to a communications panel. A message was waiting, recorded by the human system when it detected his approach. "If you are seeing this message," a familiar voice said, "you have chosen to activate Protocol Omega. This decision will alert human forces that the final phase of the Deep War has begun. Be advised that activation cannot be reversed. Once begun, events will proceed according to parameters established by emergency protocols." The voice belonged to Admiral Kim, the human representative who had made the final presentation to the Council. "You will have approximately 6 hours before human response forces arrive. Use this time to prepare your civilian populations for evacuation from Outer Rim territories. The returning human fleet will not be the same force that departed. They have been modified for deep space operations and may appear hostile to those unfamiliar with their new configuration." Ki Young felt a chill. Modified for deep space operations? What did that mean? "Remember that humans warned the Council of this day. Remember that we tried to prepare together. What happens next is the consequence of choices made by all species involved." The message ended, leaving Kai Young alone with the switch. He lifted the protective dome with hands that trembled slightly. The switch was simple, just a lever that needed to be pulled down. No complex procedures, no multiple confirmations. The sea. Humans had designed it to be used quickly in an emergency. Ki Young thought about the sensor readings showing reality itself breaking down at the galaxy's edge. He thought about the billions of lives that might depend on what happened in the next few seconds. He pulled the switch. Immediately, every display in Command Zero lit up with activity. Status indicators cascaded across screens as systems throughout the galaxy received the activation signal. The installation's power output tripled, then doubled again. "Protocol Omega is now active," announced the facility's computer in a calm, human voice. "All network installations are switching to emergency configuration. Deep space monitoring arrays are now operating at maximum sensitivity. Defensive systems are charging to full power." Through the command center's viewport, Ki Young could see the installation changing. Sections that had been dormant were now glowing with energy. Structures were unfolding from the facility's core, massive arrays that stretched into space like the arms of some enormous mechanical creature. "Quantum beacon is transmitting," the computer continued. "Message sent to staging areas Sigma 7 through Sigma 23. Estimated response time, 6 hours, 14 minutes. Kai Young opened a communication channel to report back to the Council. "Protocol. Omega has been activated successfully. The beacon is transmitting. Human response forces are expected in approximately 6 hours. Back on the Central Council Station, Chairman Guan received the report with mixed feelings. Relief that the activation had worked. Anxiety about what would happen next. All council members should prepare their species for possible evacuation of outer rim territories, he announced. We don't know what the returning humans will require from us, but the first signs that something was wrong came much sooner than 6 hours. Dr. Nari was monitoring gravitational sensors from her laboratory when the readings suddenly spiked. This is impossible, she muttered, checking her instruments again. The anomalies at the galaxy's edge were expanding rapidly, much faster than human projections had indicated. What should have taken months was happening in hours. "One," she called to her assistant. "Get me a direct communication link to Command. 0. Something's accelerating the timeline." At Command 0, Ki Young was watching the same data with growing alarm. The defensive network was tracking dozens of new anomalies, all of them growing larger and more active. "Computer," he said, "are these readings accurate?" Affirmative. Dimensional barriers are failing at an accelerated rate. Current projections indicate first major incursion in 4 hours, 37 minutes. 4 hours. The humans wouldn't arrive for 6 hours. Ki Young activated an emergency communication to the council. The timeline has changed. We have less than 5 hours before the first incursions. The human response force won't arrive in time. On his screens, he could see automated defense systems coming online throughout the galaxy. Human installations were powering up weapons and shields, but without crews to operate them, they were limited to basic automated responses. That's when the first scout reports came in. Captain Wu Jin was commanding a patrol ship near the edge of Sector 12 when his sensors detected something impossible. "Navigation, confirm our position," he ordered. "Sector 12, grid reference 4472, his navigator replied. "But sir, the stars are wrong." Wu Jin looked at the main screen. The constellation that should have been visible was completely different. Stars that should have been there were missing. New stars had appeared in places where space had been empty. "Captain," his science officer called urgently, "I'm detecting massive gravitational distortions. Space itself is bending." As they watched, a section of empty space began to ripple like water. The ripples grew stronger, and suddenly something emerged from the distortion. It was impossible to describe in conventional terms. The entity seemed to exist partially outside normal space, visible only as a moving absence surrounded by crackling energy. Where it passed, reality itself seemed to fray at the edges. "Get us out of here," Wu Jin ordered. "Full speed back to the nearest station." But as they turned to flee, more distortions appeared. Dozens of them scattered across the edge of the sector. Through each one, more of the impossible entities were emerging. "Emergency transmission to Command 0, Wu Jin said. "First incursion confirmed. Multiple entities detected. They're coming through faster than expected." Across the galaxy, similar reports flooded in. The deep ones were breaking through dimensional barriers in 12 different sectors simultaneously. The human defensive network was activating automatically, but without human crews, it was fighting a losing battle. At Command 0, Ki Young watched the tactical displays with growing despair. Red warning indicators were spreading across the galaxy map like a plague. Automated defenses were engaging the intruders, but they were overwhelmed. "Computer," he said, "can we control the defensive network from here?" "Negative. Manual control. Requires authorized human genetic signatures and quantum-encrypted command codes." "What about the other installations? Can they operate independently?" "Limited capability only. Full effectiveness requires coordination through human command protocols. Ki Young stared at the displays showing the spreading chaos. They had activated the beacon, but the humans wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours. The automated defenses were buying time, but not enough. That's when he noticed something else on the sensors. Energy signatures at the very edge of detection range, moving toward the galaxy at incredible speed. Computer, analyze those incoming signatures. Analysis complete. Signatures match human vessel configurations, but energy output is 300% higher than previous specifications. Configuration suggests extensive modification for deep space operations. 300% higher? What had the humans done to their ships? Estimated arrival time? 43 minutes. Ki Young felt hope surge through him. The humans were coming early, and they were coming in force. But as he watched the energy signatures on his screen, he wondered what kind of allies they had called back to help them. The returning ships showed power levels that shouldn't be possible with any known technology. What had happened to humanity during their time away from the galaxy? More importantly, would their transformed allies even recognize the species they had once tried? The first human ship to arrive was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Ki Young watched from Command Zero as the vessel emerged from hyperspace near the installation. It was massive, 3 times the size of the largest human ships from before, their departure. But size wasn't what made it terrifying. The ship seemed to exist partially outside normal space. Its hull rippled with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. Sections of the vessel appeared solid one moment and translucent the next, as if it was phasing between different dimensions. "This is Admiral Kyung of the Deep Fleet," came a transmission that made Ki Young's instruments crackle with interference. "Command Zero, respond." Ki Young opened a communication channel with trembling hands. "This is Ki Young of the Galactic Council. We activated Protocol Omega as instructed." "Understood. Prepare for immediate data transfer. We need current tactical information on incursion sites." The voice was unmistakably human, but there was something different about it. Something cold and mechanical that hadn't been there before. "Admiral," Ki Young said carefully, "what happened to your ship? It doesn't match any human designs in our records. We adapted for deep space warfare. Standard hull configurations cannot survive in dimensional zones. Stand by for fleet arrival." As Admiral Kyung spoke, more ships emerged from hyperspace. Dozens of them, all showing the same impossible modifications. The human fleet had become something that belonged more to nightmare than reality. "Computer," Ki Young whispered, "are those ships still registering as human vessels?" "Uncertain. Energy signatures are consistent with human quantum signatures, but heavily modified. Recommend extreme caution." Through Command Zero's communication systems, Ki Young could hear radio chatter between the arriving ships. The voices were definitely human, but they used terminology that made no sense. References to dimensional anchoring, void-walking protocols, and reality stabilization fields. What had the humans become during their time away? Dr. Garam was asking the same question as she watched the human fleet deploy from her monitoring station. She had been one of the few council scientists who believed human warnings about dimensional threats. Now she was seeing the consequences of those threats made manifest. "Doctor," her assistant's son called urgently, "I'm detecting massive quantum disturbances. The human ships are affecting space around them." Garam checked her instruments. The readings were extraordinary. The human vessels were somehow strengthening the fabric of reality in their immediate vicinity. Where normal space had been weakening due to dimensional incursions, The presence of human ships was making it solid again. They're not just ships, she realized. They're mobile reality anchors. But the most shocking discovery came when Dr. Yun gained access to previously encrypted human archives. With Protocol Omega active, security restrictions on human databases had been lifted. What she found changed everything the Council thought they knew about humanity. Chairman Guan, she called over emergency communication. I've accessed the complete human historical records. You need to see this immediately. Guan hurried to the Science Directorate, where Yun had set up a secure briefing room. The holographic displays showed star charts spanning thousands of years. This is the true history of humanity, Yun began. Earth was never their homeworld. They originated near the galactic core, in a region they called the First Territories. The display showed a thriving civilization of dozens of star systems, all marked with human colonies and installations. What happened to them? Guan asked. The deep ones, Yun replied grimly. 3,000 years ago, dimensional barriers in the galactic core began failing. Humanity fought a war lasting centuries, trying to contain the incursions. The display shifted to show the progression of the war. Human territories gradually shrinking as sector after sector fell to dimensional instability. They weren't refugees, Guan realized. They were conducting a fighting retreat. More than that, they were buying time for other species to develop. Every year humanity held the line was another year for civilizations like ours to advance technologically. The implications were staggering. While other species had been building peaceful societies, humanity had been sacrificing itself to protect them from threats they didn't even know existed. Look at this, Yun continued, showing battle records from the core wars. Human casualties numbered in the trillions. Entire fleets were lost fighting entities that existed partially outside reality. They developed weapons and tactics that required them to modify their own biology. Modify how? Cybernetic integration to interface with reality manipulation technology. Genetic alterations to survive in unstable dimensional zones. Some units underwent psychological conditioning to maintain sanity while fighting enemies that drove normal minds insane just by being perceived. Guan stared at the records. Humanity hadn't just been fighting a war. They had been transforming themselves into something capable of winning it. The humans who left the galaxy weren't the same species that originally lived here, Yun explained. They were the survivors of a war that had been going on for millennia. The warnings they gave, us, the defensive installations they built, it was all based on hard experience, and we called them paranoid, Guan said quietly. There's more. The evacuation 6 months ago wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic redeployment. The humans knew the dimensional barriers in this region were about to fail. They withdrew to staging, areas outside the galaxy to prepare for the final phase of the war. The display showed current tactical information from the human fleet. Ships were moving to positions throughout the galaxy, setting up defensive lines around areas where dimensional incursions were occurring. They're not here to help us, Guan realized. They're here to finish a war they've been fighting for thousands of years. Meanwhile, at the edge of Sector 12, Captain Wu Jin was getting his first close look at human forces in action. His patrol ship had been ordered to observe and report on human operations. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. The human ships moved through space in formations that seemed to ignore normal physics. They could appear in one location and instantly manifest in another, as if distance was optional. When they engaged the deep ones, the battles took place in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Captain," his science officer reported, "the humans are using weapons that affect the structure of space itself. They're not just destroying the entities, they're erasing them from reality." Wu Jin watched as human ships fired beams of energy that seemed to create temporary holes in space. The deep ones, which had proven immune to conventional weapons, simply ceased to exist when caught in these fields. How is that possible? Wu Jin wondered. "I don't think those are weapons," his science officer replied. "I think they're tools for repairing reality." That's when Wu Jin received a direct communication from the human fleet. "Council vessel, this is Commander Ho of Deep Strike Force 7. You are in a combat zone. Withdraw immediately." "Commander Ho, this is Captain Wu Jin. We're here to observe and assist if possible." "Negative. Council forces are not equipped for dimensional warfare. Your presence compromises tactical operations. Withdraw to minimum safe distance." There was something in Ho's voice that brooked no argument. This wasn't a request. It was an order from someone who had authority born of terrible experience. As Wu Jin's ship withdrew, he watched the human fleet engage a massive dimensional incursion. The battle was unlike anything in recorded history. Ships that could phase between realities fought enemies that existed as living void. Weapons that could reshape space itself were deployed with mechanical precision, and throughout it all, the human forces showed no emotion, no hesitation, no mercy. They fought with the efficiency of machines and the dedication of crusaders. "What have they become?" Wu Jin's science officer whispered. The answer came from Command Zero, where Ki Young had gained access to human personnel records. The files revealed the true cost of humanity's long war. The returning humans were no longer entirely human. Centuries of modification had transformed them into something new, beings capable of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, immune to the madness-inducing effects of Deep One contact, equipped with technology that treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolute rules. They were humanity's children, shaped by war into the perfect weapons against an enemy that threatened the very concept of existence. And they had returned to finish what their ancestors had started. But as Ki Young read deeper into the files, he found something that chilled him more than the descriptions of human modifications. A note in Admiral Kim's personal log, written just before the evacuation. "The Council species are not ready for this war. They lack the psychological preparation for what must be done. If Protocol Omega is activated, we will return to save what can be saved. But we will not make the same mistakes our ancestors made. This time, we will end the threat permanently, whatever the cost. Whatever the cost." Ki Young looked at the tactical displays showing human forces deploying throughout the galaxy. They weren't just fighting the deep ones, they were implementing something called Final Solution Protocols, and he had a terrible feeling that the Council species were about to discover what those protocols involved. The human fleet that emerged from deep space was nothing like what the galaxy remembered. Admiral Kyung stood on the bridge of his flagship, the reality's edge, watching tactical displays that showed the full scope of the dimensional incursions. His ship's consciousness, for it was conscious now, merged with quantum computing systems that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, fed him data faster than any biological mind could process. But Kyung was no longer entirely biological. Cybernetic. Implants threaded through his brain allowed him to interface directly with his ship's systems. His eyes had been replaced with sensors that could perceive dimensional distortions. Half of his body had been modified with technology that let him survive in spaces where reality was unstable. He was human, but barely recognizable as the species that had once lived peacefully in the galaxy. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported. "Dimensional incursions detected in 47 sectors. The breach points are expanding faster than projected." "Expected," Kyung replied, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in multiple dimensions. "The Council's activation of Protocol Omega destabilized the remaining barriers. We have perhaps 6 hours before cascade failure spreads to core territories." Around him, his bridge crew worked with mechanical efficiency. Like Kyung, they had been modified for this war. Some had neural implants that let them think in 11 dimensions. Others had been surgically altered to survive exposure to Deep One environments. All of them had volunteered for modifications that made them something beyond human. They had to be beyond human. Normal minds couldn't survive what they had seen in the spaces between realities. "Deploy the fleet in Configuration Omega," Kyung ordered. "Begin reality stabilization in Sectors 1 through 12. Prepare for deep strike operations in the core breach zones." "Sir," his communications officer said, "we're receiving requests for assistance from Council forces throughout the affected regions." Kyung's modified mind processed the tactical situation in seconds. Council ships were engaging Deep Ones with conventional weapons, a futile gesture that would only get them killed and potentially create more dimensional instabilities. "Send standard withdrawal orders," he decided. "Council forces are to evacuate all personnel from affected sectors immediately. They are not equipped for this conflict." "What if they refuse to withdraw, sir?" Kyung's expression didn't change. 3 centuries of war had burned emotion out of him long ago. "Then they will be considered acceptable losses." The words would have horrified the humans who once lived peacefully in the galaxy. But those humans were gone, replaced by beings, shaped by necessity into perfect warriors against impossible enemies. Captain Dal was commanding a Council rescue fleet trying to evacuate civilians from Sector 7 when he received the human withdrawal order. His ships were loaded with refugees fleeing dimensional instabilities that were making entire star systems uninhabitable. "This is Captain Dal to Human Fleet Command," he transmitted. "We have 17,000 civilians still trapped on stations in this sector. We need more time for evacuation." The response came from a human commander whose voice carried the cold precision of someone who had made such calculations countless times before. "Captain Dal, this is Commander Young of Deep Strike Force 3. Sector 7 will be subject to reality, restructuring in 47 minutes. All personnel must be evacuated by that time." "Reality restructuring?" Dal asked. "What does that mean?" "Tactical nuclear deployment of dimensional stabilizers. The process will render the sector uninhabitable. For Council species." Dal felt ice in his stomach. "You're going to destroy the entire sector?" "Negative. We are going to repair reality in that sector. Unfortunately, the repair process requires energy levels that will sterilize all conventional matter within a 3-light-year radius." The casual way Young discussed the destruction of an entire sector chilled Dal to his core. "Commander, there are billions of people in that region, which is why you have 46 minutes to evacuate them." The communication ended, leaving Dal staring at displays showing the impossible task before him. 17,000 people on stations throughout a sector that was about to be deliberately sterilized. But as his ships raced toward the first evacuation point, Dal saw something that made him understand the terrible necessity of human actions. A Deep One entity had manifested near one of the refugee stations. It was enormous, larger than the station itself, and where it touched normal space, reality simply unraveled. Stars winked out of existence. Planets dissolved into quantum foam. The very concept of matter seemed to break down in its presence. the pole. Station's shields, designed to protect against conventional threats, might as well have been tissue paper. As the entity approached, sections of the station began to phase out of existence. Taking crew members with them, then human ships arrived. The vessels that engaged the Deep One were unlike anything Dal had ever seen in action. They moved through space as if distance and time were optional concepts. When they fired their weapons, reality itself seemed to bend around the energy beams. But it wasn't the weapons that made Dal understand what humanity had become. It was watching human crew members voluntarily expose themselves to dimensional distortions that would have driven normal minds insane, fighting hand-to-hand with entities that existed partially outside reality. One human ship deliberately phased into the same dimensional space as the Deep One, engaging it in a form of combat that violated every law of physics. Dal watched as the human vessel literally reshaped local space-time to trap the entity, then used some kind of reality manipulation device to force it back into the dimensional void. The entire battle lasted less than 10 minutes, when it was over. The Deep One was gone and local space had been restored to stability, but the human ship that had engaged it was visibly changed. Its hull now showed the same phase-shifting characteristics Dal had noticed in the rest of the human fleet. "Captain," his science officer said quietly, "that ship is now existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Its crew has been exposed to dimensional forces that should have killed them instantly." Dal realized he was looking at the true cost of humanity's war. They hadn't just developed weapons to fight the Deep Ones. They had transformed themselves into beings capable of surviving in the same impossible spaces their enemies inhabited. Meanwhile, at Command Zero, Kai Young was watching the human fleet implement what they called final solution protocols throughout the galaxy. The protocols were elegantly simple and utterly ruthless. Every sector showing dimensional instability was being reality restructured, a process that involved deploying devices that could literally repair the fabric of space-time. The energy requirements were enormous, enough to sterilize entire star systems. "Computer," Ki Young asked, "how many inhabited systems will be affected by reality restructuring?" Current projections indicate 47 star systems containing approximately 300 billion inhabitants. 300 billion lives. The number was too large to truly comprehend. Are there alternatives to this approach? Negative. Deep One incursions have compromised dimensional stability beyond conventional repair methods. Reality restructuring is the only method capable of permanent resolution. Ki Young stared at the tactical displays. The humans weren't being cruel. They were being efficient. They had learned from 3,000 years of fighting this war that half measures only led to larger catastrophes. But that didn't make the cost any easier to accept. "Sir," the computer continued, "incoming transmission from Admiral Ki Young." The Admiral's image appeared on the main screen, and Ki Young had to suppress a gasp. Ki Young looked human, but barely. His eyes were artificial constructs that seemed to perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously. Cables ran from ports in his skull to his ship's systems. When he moved, reality seemed to ripple around him. "Council representative," Ki Young said, "your species are to be commended for activating Protocol Omega. However, your continued presence in combat zones is counterproductive. Admiral, we want to help. Our people are dying out there. Your people lack the modifications necessary for dimensional warfare. Their presence creates additional variables that compromise tactical efficiency." The coldness in Ki Young's voice was absolute. This wasn't the same species that had once worked alongside council members, sharing discoveries and building cooperative relationships. "What happened to you?" Ki-young asked. For a moment, something almost human flickered in Kyung's artificial eyes. "We adapted," he said simply. "The war demanded it. Your species still has the luxury of remaining what you were born to be. We gave up that luxury 3,000 years ago." "But you're still human, are we?" Kyung asked. "Can beings who exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously, who can reshape reality with their thoughts, who have fought wars in spaces where time flows backward, can such beings still be called human?" Kai-young had no answer. "Continue monitoring from Command 0, Kyung ordered. When the reality restructuring is complete, we will assess what remains. Perhaps some of your species will survive to rebuild what we are about to destroy." The transmission ended, leaving Ki-young alone with the terrible understanding of what the humans had become and what they were about to do. Across the galaxy, the final phase of the deep war was beginning. Reality itself would be the battlefield. The war lasted 18 days. June watched it all from the last functional council station, a monitoring post at the edge of what had once been civilized space. His instruments tracked the systematic destruction and reconstruction of entire sectors as human forces implemented their final solution protocols. It was the most terrifying display of power the galaxy had ever witnessed. On the first day, reality restructuring began in the outer rim sectors. June watched as human ships deployed devices that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics themselves. Space folded and twisted as dimensional stabilizers forced breaches in reality to seal themselves. The energy output was beyond measurement. When the process was complete, entire star systems had been transformed into something that barely qualified as normal space. The stars still shone, but they were different now, locked into dimensional configurations that made Deep One incursion impossible. They were also completely uninhabitable by any conventional life forms. "Sir," June's assistant reported, "we're receiving casualty reports from the affected sectors." The numbers were staggering. Billions of beings had died in the first day alone, not from direct attack, but from the simple fact that reality restructuring was incompatible with biological life. The humans hadn't targeted civilians. They had simply prioritized dimensional stability over everything else. By the 5th day, the pattern was clear. Human forces were creating a ring of restructured space around the galaxy's core, systematically, sealing every possible breach point. The cost in lives was enormous, but the strategy was working. Deep One incursions were being contained and eliminated. But the true scope of human planning became apparent on the 8th day, when Admiral Kyung transmitted a message to all surviving council stations. "Council species," Kyung's distorted voice, carried across space, "you are witnessing the conclusion of a war that began before your civilizations achieved spaceflight. What we do now, we do to ensure that this threat can never return." The holographic image showed Kyung on his bridge, but he looked even less human than before. Prolonged exposure to dimensional manipulation had changed him further. Parts of his body now existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "The Deep Ones are not merely invaders from another dimension," he continued. "They are entropy given form, beings whose very existence weakens the barriers between realities. Every incursion they make creates permanent damage to the structure of space-time." June felt a chill as he began to understand what the Admiral was leading up to. For 3,000 years, humanity has fought a defensive war, sealing breaches, as they appeared, containing incursions as they developed. This approach has failed. The damage accumulates faster than it can be repaired. The display shifted to show a map of the galaxy with areas of dimensional instability marked in red. There were hundreds of them, scattered throughout civilized space. Final solution. Protocols represent a change in strategy. Instead of containing the threat, we are eliminating it permanently. Every region of space that has been compromised by Deep One presence must be reality restructured. Every dimension that has been touched by their influence must be sealed. How much of the galaxy are you planning to restructure? Came a desperate transmission from a council representative. Kyung's response was delivered with the same cold precision he used for tactical reports. 63% of inhabited space shows evidence of dimensional contamination. All affected regions will undergo reality restructuring within the next 10 days. 63%. The number hit June like a physical blow. That meant the destruction of thousands of worlds, the deaths of trillions of beings, the complete elimination of most council civilizations. Admiral, came another desperate transmission. Surely there must be alternatives, some way to save at least some of the inhabited worlds. Negative. Partial solutions have been attempted for 3 millennia. They are insufficient. This threat requires permanent resolution. By the 10th day, June understood that he was witnessing the end of galactic civilization as it had existed for thousands of years. The humans worked with mechanical efficiency, their modified fleets moving through space like antibodies through a diseased organism. They showed no emotion as they sterilized system after system. To them, this was simply the final phase of a war they had been fighting since before most council species had developed writing. But it was on the 12th day that June witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A group of council representatives had managed to arrange a meeting with human command. They approached under a flag of truce, hoping to negotiate some kind of compromise that might save at least part of their civilizations. Counselor Young led the delegation. June watched through long-range sensors as her ship approached the human flagship. She had prepared a detailed proposal, suggestions for partial reality restructuring that might preserve some inhabited worlds, offers of cooperation in future dimensional monitoring, pleas for mercy for civilian populations. Admiral Ho received the delegation personally. Unlike Kyung, Ho still looked recognizably human, though cables and implants showed the modifications he had undergone. "Counselors," Ho said as they were brought to his bridge, "you have something to say." Young stepped forward, her voice carrying the desperation of someone speaking for billions of lives. "Admiral, we understand the necessity of your actions. But surely there must be some way to preserve at least the core worlds of our civilizations. We're willing to accept any conditions, any restrictions you deem necessary." Ho listened patiently as Young outlined their proposal. She spoke of limited reality restructuring, of evacuating populations to safe zones, of accepting human oversight of all dimensional monitoring in the future. When she finished, Ho was quiet for a long moment. "Counselor Young," he said finally, "do you know what happened to the Zelkarian homeworld?" Young looked confused. "It was destroyed in a Deep One incursion 3 days ago." Incorrect. The Zelkarian homeworld was infected by Deep One influence 200 years ago. What you thought was their homeworld was actually a dimensional echo, a reflection of their original world that existed partially in Deep One space. The implications hit Young like a hammer blow. "That's impossible. We had diplomatic relations with them for centuries. You had diplomatic relations with beings that were partially transformed by Deep One influence. Every trade agreement, every cultural exchange, every political alliance you made with them was actually with entities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Young stared at him in horror. Are you saying the Zelkarians weren't real? They were real, but they were no longer entirely part of our reality. And through their interactions with your species, that contamination was spreading. Ho activated a display that showed dimensional analysis of the Zelkarian territories. The readings were disturbing. Reality itself was unstable throughout their space, weakened by centuries of Deep One influence. This is why partial solutions are impossible, Ho continued. The contamination spreads through contact. Every species that interacted with dimensionally compromised entities became compromised themselves. Every world they visited, every station they built, every trade route they used, all of it carries traces of dimensional instability. Young's face had gone pale. How long have you known? We've been tracking dimensional contamination throughout Council space for 200 years. The spread pattern follows trade routes, diplomatic contacts, and migration paths. By the time we evacuated from the galaxy, 40% of Council space was already compromised. And now it's 63%. The contamination accelerated after we left because there were no longer any humans maintaining dimensional monitoring stations. Young looked around at Ho's bridge crew, seeing them with new understanding. These weren't just modified humans. They were the immune system of reality itself, beings who had sacrificed their humanity to fight a war against the very concept of existence. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked quietly. "We tried," Ho replied. Every warning about dimensional threats, every proposal for monitoring systems, every request for defensive installations, we were trying to teach you to recognize and contain dimensional contamination. But we thought you were being paranoid. Yes, and now the contamination has spread so far that the only solution is to sterilize 63% of the galaxy and rebuild it from scratch. Young stood in silence for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what she had learned. Then she asked the question that June, watching from his monitoring station, was also thinking. "What happens to the survivors?" "You will be relocated to clean space beyond the galactic rim while we complete the reality restructuring. In approximately 50 years, when the process is finished, you may petition for resettlement rights in the restructured territories. Under what conditions? Permanent human oversight of all dimensional monitoring, mandatory genetic screening for dimensional contamination, restricted access to certain technologies, and acceptance that any future threat to dimensional stability will result in immediate sterilization of the affected areas. It wasn't mercy, it was probation." The war ended on the 18th day. June watched from his monitoring station as the last Deep One incursion was sealed and the final reality restructuring was completed. The galaxy looked the same from